Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode where I'm going to show you how we built this really cool live edge table. It had some big cracks and holes in the middle. We added some epoxy in to make it look beautiful. I'm going to take you on this journey on the steps and methods we took in building this beast. Hopefully by the end of this video I could have taught you something. So you also might want to stick around until the end of this video because we got a really cool announcement we want to share with you. So starting off this week's project, for everyone that's going to ask me in the comments down below, what wood species are we using? So unfortunately for every single person that's going to ask, the specific wood species is called Matumi. And it's only sourced from the country I'm from, South Africa. And I honestly do have to say it's a really beautiful wood species to work with. It's got some really beautiful grains and features. And it also has a downside though. The wood contains a lot of oil. Which meaning that in the drying process, the wood needs to stay in the kiln oven a little bit longer than your other wood species. So starting off this week's project, this is the underside of our table. And you'll see later on the top side, we've got some really beautiful features, some cracks and big holes we had to fill with epoxy. And I'm basically just adding our standard white melamine sheet with a little bit of silicone on the other side. So when we're going to pour the epoxy from the top, that it's not going to leak out at the bottom. Now you'll see this step I'm doing here is just making sure, taking extra precautions to make sure the epoxy is not going to leak out. So you'll see I added some silicone on the inside of our mold and on the outside, just making double sure we've got no leakage when I'm going to pour. So we just waited a couple of hours for the silicone to dry. Then we had to flip this beast over so we can start the pouring process on this table. And another tip I want to give you is obviously when you're planning to pour your epoxy, you have to make sure that you clean your piece of wood thoroughly to make sure there's no dust particles whatsoever when you're going to pour your epoxy. And also make sure you're not only cleaning the inside of the cracks and holes, but your physical table as well. Now for the pigments we're going to use for the color we wanted to achieve is a lot of copper. Added some black pigment and a little bit of white pearl pigment to achieve the color we're going to use, and the client absolutely loved this color. Came out really beautiful. And another tip I want to give you is when you're going to mix your epoxy, make sure you mix it thoroughly, meaning that we as a epoxy company manufacturer, when we stir our epoxy, we will do it for around about 3 to 5 minutes. We will leave it for around about 10 to 15 minutes. That time gap we're giving it is just giving the epoxy enough time for around about 50 to 70% of the air bubbles we created with the stirring process to rise up. And as you can see, we started pouring the epoxy, and the specific epoxy we're using for this project is called Woodcast. And yet again, it's only sourced from the country I'm from, South Africa. And this is not a deep casting epoxy. We ended up pouring around about 5, I think we ended up 6 layers we casted for this project. So we ended up casting around about 10 to 12 mil at a time. So if you guys enjoy the content and you guys want to learn more and see what we're up to in our channel and in our shop, make sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and leave me a comment down below. What do you think of this table so far? You might want to check out the end of this video where I'm going to show you the final product and how beautiful this table came out. So we had this one section on the side of our table that was a little bit lower than the level we wanted to cast on for our epoxy, and we had to add some silicone to create like a barrier so the epoxy is not going to leak out. Moving on to the next step in our project, and that's by cutting our table down to its final size. And as you can see, I'm just doing some rough measurements to make sure the edges of our table is going to be in line with the length of our table, meaning we don't want to sit with an angle when you're going to stand at a certain angle on your table that it's not going to look square. So you take a center line of the length of the table, we draw that line, and then from that line we draw a square line at the end of our tables to make sure we've got a very square table. And as usual, taking out my FESTOOL track saw, and you'll see now in the next step I'm cutting around about 80mm thick slab once, not 2 or 3 cuts. We're doing this cut once. I absolutely love this track saw from FESTOOL. Now, after around about 5 days, waited for the epoxy to cure, I came back to remove the underside of our wood. And the one mistake I made on 2 of these white melamine pieces I added at the bottom, I didn't add wax release melt agent on the inside when I glued these white melamine sheets to the underside of our table, meaning that the epoxy stuck to the wood and it stuck to the white melamine sheet we used to make sure the epoxy is not going to leak out. However, we did manage to remove it with a belt sander. And moving on to the next part in our project, that's the sanding process. The process I absolutely hate the most, but I do have to say the FESTOOL ROTEX machine will make your life easy when it comes to sanding. And we're starting our project off with a 80 grit sandpaper. Then we're going to move up all the way to 400 grit sandpaper. And another tip I want to give you in when you're going to build a live edge table, you want to make sure to sand the live edge as well. Meaning if you're going to take a cloth and you wipe it over the live edge, you want to make sure that there's no material, or when the client is going to walk against the table, there's no places on the side of the table that will tear your client's clothing. This is a super crucial step. You have to make sure you have a very smooth edge on the live edge of your table. Moving to the next step in our project, we stopped sanding at 180 grit sandpaper. Then you will see you will be left with some micro cracks and holes you have to close. So we founded this product also from AMT. It's a quick set epoxy, and you'll see when I'm going to apply the epoxy, I will make sure to hold my hand in front of the epoxy to make sure the sun is not going to get in contact with the epoxy, because the product is called Crystal UV. Once it's going to get in contact with the sun rays, it's going to take a matter of a few seconds for that epoxy to set as a rock. Now, I do have to say I'm super impressed with this product, and this product saved us around about 2 to 3 days, because the way we previously done it is we will cover our complete surface with epoxy. We will wait 1 day and then we will come and sand it down, and that also counts for the bottom side of our table. Now, moving to the next step in our project is by adding some steel inserts on the underside of our table. And I do have to say, I'm super impressed with the FESTOOL ROTEX machine. We recently invested in this jig from FESTOOL, and you basically clamp it to your router and then you slide the jig on the track from FESTOOL. And I honestly do have to say, I love the system, because the way we previously done it is we had to get a straight edge, we had to measure a lot, but this will make your life easy. So what you see me doing here is just making sure I have the correct measurements when I'm going to cut my second line, because the steel inserts we're going to add has to be sitting flush with the underside of your wood. Also, just making sure that you don't go too deep in your table. Now, so once you routed the 2 grooves inside your table, you need to make sure you remove around about 5 to 7 mil between the 2 gaps you routed, so you make sure your steel insert is going to sit flush with your table. So why do we add steel inserts on the underside of our table? It's to prevent wood movement. Now, what is wood movement? Now, this specific piece, the moisture content in our wood is sitting at 9%, meaning that there should be no wood movement whatsoever. But for future sakes, we don't want the client to call us in 5 or 6 or 10 months or 2 years saying that something doesn't look right for them. Meaning that when wood is going to get in contact with humidity, it can swell or it can shrink. Now, to prevent this in the future, we are adding steel inserts on the underside of our table. It's going to prevent your table from warping in the future. So if I can give you advice to do the same if you're going to build tables for your clients. And now, to fasten your steel inserts on the underside of your table, we're using threaded inserts. This is our go-to method for having a nice neat finish when you're going to anything under your table, even your steel base. Make sure you use threaded inserts. And this is one of the most satisfying parts when building custom furniture, is to see that your whole plan is coming together. Now, one of the final steps before we get to the oiling part is to sand your table down all the way to 220 grit or 400 grit. We ended up going to 400 grit because the oil we're going to use allow us to sand to higher grits. Now we sand it to 400, then we're going to use a scorch pad just to make sure that we've got a very smooth surface before we start with the oiling process. And also make sure when you're done sanding, you have to wipe and clean your surface before you're going to add the oil to your table. And this is just another tip I want to give you is we did wipe our table with a microfiber cloth, but we're using a polish machine with a sheep wool buff just to remove the last dust particles before we're going to start with the oiling process. Now, the specific oil we're going to use is called Odis oil. I absolutely love Odis oil. It's meant for indoor, outdoor, it's food safe, and it's just got a very good rating, and we absolutely love using this oil on basically all the tables we build. Now, before I'm going to show you the final product, if you guys enjoy this video, or if you have any recommendations for me, leave me a comment down below. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to our channel. It's only going to help us to produce future content. And if you guys want to check out our other work, go and check out our YouTube channel. We've got tons of epoxy tables we are busy with. And before you go, make sure you stay until the end of this video, because we've got an online epoxy masterclass we're presenting. And if you guys want to learn how to build these tables without making any mistakes, go and check it out. I am also going to leave a link down in the description where you can go and check out this online masterclass. Thank you for joining this week's video. I'll see you next week with another super cool project. Thanks guys. Cheers. Welcome to this online epoxy masterclass. Moisture content. You heat right into the core wood species to remove the bark with an aggressive steel wire brush. Table design, slab preparation, building process, epoxy mold. Release agent wax. Calculate epoxy. 7, 8, so we got 16 points. Mixing epoxy. Color consistency. Whether to seal your live edges or not. Pouring epoxy. Sanding between layers. Sanding grooves inside your epoxy. Dealing with bubbles. Maximum depth. Curing time. Removing the table from your mold. Our local CNC supplier. Start sanding. Cutting your table to size and edge.
filling the cracks and holes. Smoky finish, high gloss see-through finish. Wood surface finishing, tabletop supports to drill into our wooden section. Our online epoxy masterclass is finally here. It's 4 hours of masterclass where I'm going into detail on how we build all our epoxy tables, where I'm going to teach you from start to finish how to build a epoxy table successfully. I'm going to show you all our methods and techniques we take in our everyday business building epoxy tables successfully. Down in the description of this video, you're going to find the details on how to purchase this masterclass. You don't want to miss this one.